Hello, this video is for topic 3, building functions, and it is for learning target 3B, which says to write a function that describes a relationship between two quantities. So let's understand what we're being asked to do. We're being asked to write a function. And if you remember, function is really just another word for equation. So we're going to write an equation. So obviously our answers are all going to be equations that describes the relationship between two quantities. And these two quantities are always just x and y. Those are my two quantities that we're comparing. So here we always want to write equations. That is our goal. Now we have two different kinds of equations that we're going to write. We're going to write explicit functions or explicit equations, and we're going to write recursive equations. Well, we've done a lot with explicit equations or explicit functions. If you remember, that's just kind of like y equals 2x plus 1. And remember, the cool thing about explicit functions is that these two numbers always represent something very special. And the number with the x is always your slope. And the number that's by itself is always your y-intercept. That's just a fun fact. That's what it always is. Now, recursive functions look a little different, and here's what they look like. Whoa, that's a little intense. But recursive functions are also really cool, just like explicit functions are, because they have two special numbers in them too. And the special numbers actually happen to be the same special numbers that we had in our explicit function. They just look way different, right? So this first special number that we have, just like with our explicit, that's going to be our y-intercept. The second special number we have is going to be our slope. Now, the way to remember this is that our y-intercept is on the top of our recursive function, and that the slope is on the bottom of our recursive function. But that's really all it is this crazy way to still have these two special numbers. These two special numbers right here, those are the only things that are ever going to change. So let's put this into practice. We need to write equations. And again, the two kinds of equations we're going to write are explicit and recursive. Now, both of these, both explicit and recursive, have these two special numbers in them, right? We got our slope and we got our y-intercept. And both of these, those are our special numbers. So we got to find those special numbers. Well, let's look at this table. To find the slope of a table, we look at the y column. And we try and figure out, okay, what kind of pattern happened to my y values or my output values? Well, in this table, all of my outputs went down by 3 every single time. It was like they were subtracting 3. So that's going to be my slope. The other special value that we need is my y-intercept. To find my y-intercept, I find the 0 and I look across from it. That's going to be my y-intercept. So let's write these functions. Explicit functions need to be y equals, put my slope next to my x, and put my y-intercept at the end. I got my two special numbers here. I got my slope, and I got my y-intercept. Now, recursive, remember, looks crazy, but what I'm going to do is I'm just going to write it down, and I'm going to leave myself some blanks where those two special numbers are. I'm going to leave blanks. So if we look back to the previous slide, the two special numbers were right here and right here. So that's where I put my blanks, right here and right here. But you'll notice that all the other numbers and letters and symbols, they all stayed exactly the same. I just gave myself those two blanks. Now the blank on the top needs to be my y-intercept. Well, we said the y-intercept of our table was across from 0, so I'm going to put a 1 in there. The blank on the bottom is supposed to be my slope. See that? So I got to put my slope of this table down in this blank. And now I've written my explicit, and I've also written my recursive to match this table. Next up, we're going to do the same thing, but now we got a graph. So we still need our two special numbers. We need our y-intercept, and we need our slope. Well, here's my y-axis. So my y-intercept's right here at 4. But I also need my slope. And if you remember, I can't say this enough, slope is rise over run. So I got to figure out what's the rise over run of this graph. Well, if I start here and I want to go to my next point, well, I had to go down 2, so my slope is going to be -2. And I had to go over 3. So there's my slope. I got my 2 special numbers. I got my y-intercept and I got my slope. So now I'm ready to write my equations. So here I go, y equals. I always got to put my slope next to my x when I'm doing explicit with my y-intercept all by itself. And then again, recursive, we're just going to kind of think of those spots like blanks. Everything else is going to stay the same. And remember, my top blank gets my special number of my y-intercept. My bottom blank gets my special number of my slope. And now I've written both my explicit and my recursive for this graph. Lastly, here's what we got. Instead of a table or a graph, we got a description. It's telling us that we have a line that goes through 3, -1 with a slope of 2/3. So if I graph this information, remember x and y, ordered pairs make 1 point. So I'm going to 3 on my x and -1 on my y to make my 1 point. Now I got a slope of 2/3, so I'm going up 2 and over 3. And I'm making my line. Now you might be wondering why we made this line, right? Well, to make our equations, to make our explicit and our recursive function, we need our 2 special numbers. And our 2 special numbers, remember, are always slope and y-intercept. And this problem told me what my slope was, but it didn't tell me what my y-intercept was. That's why we made this graph, because now we can look at the graph to figure out what my y-intercept is. And my y-intercept is right there, because here's my y-axis and here's where they crossed each other, and that was at -3. My y-intercept special number is -3, and I got my slope of 2/3 right up here. So I am ready to write my equations. Explicit always starts with y equals. I put my slope, 2/3. I always put that next to my x, and then I put my y-intercept at the end. Recursive, I'm going to go through, and again, think about it like there's a couple blanks in here. Fill in my blanks with my special numbers. Remember, the top blank is always going to be my y-intercept, and the bottom blank is always going to be my slope. And now I did it. I wrote my explicit and I wrote my recursive functions, and we have met our learning target.